start with. So, and let's start with a scenario. I'll just give an example to sort of motivate us to begin exploring these window functions. So let's suppose we've created a simple visual as there's a matrix here, which is showing us sales by country and brand. So sales amount, just our basic sales revenue measure. And we've created a simple matrix by country and brand, and we've sorted by sales so we can see, all right, AdventureWorks is the top brand in the United States, Contoso is the top brand in Germany, and we can see if we want to, we can look at the sales of each brand within each country. And across the full data set, about 7.3 million in sales. Let's suppose that we want to isolate the top brand per country and display that top brand sales. So what I'm going to do, first I'm going to do this without using window functions, and then we'll look at how it's a bit different and hopefully a bit easier and more intuitive with window functions. So let's just pretend window functions don't exist. So window functions include the function window itself. There's index, and a rank function. And those are the sort of principal functions. But let's pretend that those don't exist for the moment. So I actually have, oops, sorry. Let me, I'll just stay on Power BI Desktop for now. So to avoid switching windows. So, and you'll find the measures that are created for specific sections are sitting in display folders under sales. So this tab, page 1 corresponds to display folder 1 here. So hopefully that's easy enough to navigate. So what I would have done in the past, I've actually already written this measure, so I'll jump in here and just display the measure I've written. So without using a window function, by the way, there are multiple ways of doing this. I've chosen a particular method that I kind of like, that I would have used pre-window functions, but there are variations, and we can maybe look at one variation. But one way of doing it is, so what we want to do is we want to find the top brand per country and display sales for that top brand per country. So what I'm doing in here is there's a function generate. I'm not sure if you haven't used generate before. Generate is basically a thing similar to SQL cross supply, if I remember rightly. So you take one table, you take, in this case, we're taking the values of customer country, and then we're effectively joining that to the top brand ranked by sales amount. So this is one possible way of doing this, using some of our long-standing DAX functions. So generate has always been there, and along with, I think all of these functions have been there from the beginning. So for each country, we derive a table within the context of that country. So we use calculate table here. And with the table that we derive is the top brand ranked by sales amount. So, and I'm doing that at the all selected level. That's not necessarily required in all cases, but what that does in this case is mean, it's kind of an efficiency thing. It means that this, if the DAX engine is doing its job, hopefully this whole table expression will be evaluated once for the entire visual. So what it's basically saying is, at the visual level, that's really what all selected means. At the visual level, give me, for each country, give me the top brand. Okay, so it derives that as a table variable, and then we use that table variable, country brand, as a filter to calculate sales amount. And the reason I've used keep filters is so that we stay within the context of a given row of the visual, or a given cell, should we say, within the visual. We remain within that context, but overlay on that the top country brand. So that measure, to be honest, is a little, in my opinion, is a little bit, to certainly someone not acquainted with DAX, or even someone acquainted with DAX, this is a little arcane. Even I think this is a bit, it's kind of, it doesn't jump out at you exactly what it's doing at a glance. So that's one issue I have with using this. I'll call it the older method, the non-window method. It's less intuitive, but nonetheless, let's see if it works. So I'll drag, this is the non-window, top brand per country. I'll drag that into the visual alongside sales amount. And let's just make that a little wider. So if we take a look, it seems to be doing the job. So we've got our top brand in US, we've got a top brand in Germany. And if we scroll down, yeah, we'll see for each country, we do indeed have the measure returning the top brand's sales on a per country basis. And if we checked the values, we would see that the total is indeed the sum of all the values above. So this measure nicely works at a country and brand level and at a grand total level. So it's doing the job. Right, so what about the window function method? So what can we do with window functions that might be a slight improvement on this? Well, I'll jump to this measure that I prepared earlier. So this is sales top brand per country window. So let's have a look. Again, this is one method. This is the method I used. It looks kind of similar. It has a couple of steps similar to the previous measure, but we're now using a window function index. So this is one of the window functions, and we'll come to what that's doing in a second. So first of all, the method I've used here is first to derive or compute a table containing, and for each country and brand, the sales value. So construct a table containing country brand combinations along with sales. One sort of small note is I'm using here summarized columns, which until recently we couldn't use reliably in measures. Then some changes were made to the engine. The function was upgraded, and now Microsoft tells us we can use summarized columns happily within measures in Power BI and Azure Analysis Services, and I expect the latest version of SQL Server Analysis Services. So it took me a while to adapt, but I do sort of happily use summarized columns within measures now. The good thing about summarized columns, just as an aside, is it basically handles all the auto exist logic. So it gives you, when you use summarized columns, the default behavior is it'll give me just the countries and brands that actually have non-blank sales in this case. So that's just an aside. And in the past, we could have also used summarize, add columns, summarize, another pattern you can use. But summarize columns is kind of more concise. It should be a highly optimized function as well, because as you may well know, most visuals, virtually every visual in a Power BI report will generate a query that uses summarized columns. So we don't have to use it. We could use a slightly different method, but that's what I've done here. So what we've done here is summarized columns, country brand sales. So what that gives us is, it's probably good just to give yourself comfort around what this is doing. If we just go to a DAX query view, I'll just get my spelling right. I'll zoom in a bit here. So if I just evaluate this as a query, just to indicate what it's doing, it's giving us a table country brand sales. So it's essentially the same information we have in the visual itself as far as sales amount. So back to this measure definition. So we've got that table, and all selected just means it's evaluated at the visual level. In theory, it will evaluate this table once, and it can reuse it during the query for this visual for multiple data points within the visual. Cool. Cool. So we've got that table. Now the new feature, the nice thing about this new function index, when I say new, it's not so new, but this window function index, we can say, give me the top, previously we used top n, now we say, give me the top one item from this table that we just derived, ordering by sales descending. Default is just relates to how blanks are handled. We won't dwell on that for now. And partition by customer country. So for those that write SQL regularly, this is, you can do all this sort of thing quite nicely in SQL. It's well established, but it's a bit more recent that we've had that DAX has introduced the ability to nicely handle these type of partitioning and order by logic. So this is a common pattern for most window functions, is that you basically, you have, in this case, I'll just bring up the, so we have a position, and in this case, we're saying, give me the first item. Then we have a relation, which is the table that we want to traverse. We then have an order by call clause. We have blanks, I've just left as default, and we have a partition by clause, both of which have dedicated functions. So you do need to remember to use these functions within window functions. So they're kind of special functions. They can only be used within functions such as index, window, or rank. Cool. So what this is doing is saying, pick out the top country brand combination grouped by country, or partitioned by country and ordered by sales. So it's essentially doing what we did before, but in a kind of a more concise way. Because previously I had the generate top n, kind of a clunky two function way of doing things. Now we're handling basically the picking out the top item in a single function. And then similar to the previous version, we calculate sales with the top country brand sales applied as a filter. So let's confirm that we get the same result. So I'll bring this measure into the, and indeed we do. Right, so now if we, so yep, it looks to be producing the exact same result. Great, working correctly, okay. And depending on what we needed to show in our report, we could just remove sales amount if we just want to see those top brands per country. And I might just leave this on just the window function itself, the window measure. Cool. So now what you might be thinking, well, these two measures kind of both looked, in terms of number of lines of code, the non-window measure was 23 lines. Actually, the window function-based measure is 25 lines. Did I really improve much? Kind of had to write maybe a little bit more code. Well, one nice thing is if you change your requirements might not always be the top brand. Maybe your requirements, let's say you want to see the top two brands. Okay, we can actually do that. I'll bring this measure back in. So if we wanted to see the top two brands, we would change in the old measure. Let's change the top N1 to a top N2. And let's go back to the visual here. I'll just put the non-window measure first. So, okay, so our non-window measure has been expanded to the top two brands per country. If we want to do that in the window function, it's actually, what we'll notice here is the index, one thing with the index function, it only actually takes a single index, so it doesn't give you a range. So what we would then have to do is change index to window. So what window does is basically gives us a range of indexes, and those are relative to the current context, whatever it may be. But what we can do with, if we change to window, we just have to specify a few more parameters to give us say a window from the top first to the second brand. So if we go 1 apps to 2 apps, what that means is the absolute first to the absolute second. I've got that right. Let's just double check that does what we think it does. Yeah, now my window measure is doing the exact same thing as my non-window measure. So actually that wasn't, okay, I had to tweak both of those a little bit, but now suppose we wanted to do something more that's a bit trickier to handle with a non-window. Suppose we just wanted the third and fourth top brands. So that's actually quite awkward to do without window functions. If I wanted to say, give me the third and fourth ranked brands, I would need to either generate a rank, or I would need to do a couple of top ends, give me the top 4 and then take the bottom 2 of those, or generate a rank and then filter it to 3 and 4. So that's kind of awkward without a window function. I'm not going to try to do it right now, but with a window function, with the actual window function here, we can easily just change it to 3, go from the 3rd rank to the 4th ranked. And if I bring back in, I'll bring back the base sales amount measure just so we can confirm that's working. Put that first. Yep, so indeed, sort by sales amount, sorry, be a bit clearer. Yeah, so indeed we now, with this window function based measure, we have the 3rd and 4th ranked brands per country. A little bit of a contrived example just to generate generate how you would write such a measure, but it's really for those more complex scenarios where maybe you have a parameter in your report to select, I want to see a certain range of rankings, and you have a slider to select them, or for some reason you want to see, you want to see things that aren't just top or bottom, you want to see a range. The window function itself for a range, or the index function just for a single rank are really useful. So yeah, we've talked about window and index. I would just think of window as being a range of indexes, and index just a single index. And the nice thing is, if you decide to order by something else, if you decide to partition by some other attribute or multiple attributes, you can do that to your heart's content. So you can add multiple order by and multiple partition by parameters, and the logic will all work the same. So I think quite powerful. It's quite a powerful set of functions. So now this, probably you wouldn't create a visual just like this, but you might create a visual like, where are we here? You might create, sorry, undo that. It's more likely that you might create a visual where you want to see country brand, top brand per country window, and we drill down to the you might want to see something like this. So you might, in this case, it's I changed it back to top 1 and 2, didn't I? Let's change it back to 1 to 2. Yeah, so the top 2 brands per country in a sort of nice visual form like that. So yeah, lots of applications of these functions. That's just one. So hopefully that's something to sort of, if you haven't played with those functions, to spark your interest. Cool. Just monitoring the chat. I think we're all good. Okay, so I'll jump onto a second example, which is another of these window functions, which is rank. Now, let me just, okay, let's suppose, we want to compute the rank of a product, and we're grouping products by country. So here I've got a visual with country and product name on the rows, and I'm using a slightly different measure, sales amount rounded, just to illustrate how we can break ties with the rank function. So I'll just use these rounded. So I've got these measures that refer to product sales rounded. I'll just focus on these for now. So if we wanted to, compute the rank of sales, for example, we've got, we'll zoom back in. You'll see that we've got, and let's look at Germany. We've got multiple products tied at 20,000. Then we've got a bunch of products 10,000. And because I've rounded to the nearest 10,000, we've got a bunch of products with 0. So using the old, I'll call it the old function RANKX, we could write a measure. I'll just write this one from scratch. So I'll call it product sales rounded RANKX. Simple. So the RANKX function, which is the X tells us that it's an iterator. It iterates over a table. So you have to decide at what level you are ranking. I'm going to go with all selected product name. Sorry, let's just go product name. And we're going to rank sales amount rounded. The tooltips there, yeah. So we're ranking, and by default, we can, I won't specify a third argument, so we assume that we're ranking for each product sales amount rounded, and in the current context, evaluating the same measure. And we'll rank it descending, and ties will make dents. Let's check that's working. Yeah, so I'll just make a slight change there. Let's only return a result if product name is in scope. So that checks if product name is within the current set of row fields or grouping fields within the visual, just so we don't display it at a total level. So that's doing a simple ranking. You've got 1s for the 20,000s, you've got 2s for the 10,000s, because I've chosen dents. Otherwise it'd be 1 and 4, and we've got 3s for the 0s. Let's suppose we want to break ties now with the product name. So you're in a situation where you want to break ties. Now, that's actually quite a hard thing to do with RANKX. And I won't go into all the details, but the links are in here. So if we do that with RANKX and we want to break ties, it is kind of awkward. There are multiple approaches. Sometimes you can do 2 ranks and kind of rank your sales value, then rank your product, and combine those into a sort of combined rank. Kind of awkward. There's a bit of maths. It's doable. There's another method, which this is a pretty ugly example of, which is, there's some links here to some discussions on this method, but using a special function called substitute with index. Again, this is a pretty ugly method. Substitute with index is normally used internally when Power BI generates queries for visuals. It's not a nice function, not a very intuitive function, but technically you can create an index based on 2 different sales amount and product name, two different two fields defining a sort order. Then you've got to extract that index and treat it as a rank. So technically we can do that. Let's see if that should work. I'll just I'll remove the, yeah, so here we go. Yeah, so it is giving us the tie-breaking rank. So the product name is used to break ties. How can we do that more easily with a window function? So here's the measure using a window function, one way of writing it. I'm going to add my quotes there just to be pedantic. Yeah. Cool. So what the rank function does, let's just focus on this part of the code here. Zoom in a little bit. So what the rank function does that RANKX doesn't do is you have all the ability to partition and order by multiple fields. So we couldn't do that with RANKX, which is why that previous example had the horrible substitute with index function. So using rank, we specify dense, it happens to be the first argument. Then you specify a table that you're ranking over. Here I've derived a similar table to one we saw earlier, where I've got product name and sales, basically, at an all selected level, just for, so we get the overall set of products within the visual. Now, we can then order by, this is the key thing, we can order by both sales as the first criterion, and product as the second ordering criterion. So we're ordering by sales descending and product ascending. And we could add more, if we had more fields in the visual and we needed to construct a more complex set of fields to order by, yep, we could do that. So this is much more elegant, it's much briefer than the RANKX version that needed all this intermediate calculation and won't perform that well. If you tested this on a relatively large volume of data, this is going to potentially perform worse than a nice, concise, and hopefully optimized function rank. I haven't done detailed performance testing for this presentation, but I mean, the ease of reading the code and the maintainability really sells it to me. If you're, especially if you're picking up a model that used a measure like this, it adds a bunch of technical debt to maintaining this, and yeah, I really don't like using a function like substitute with index, which is pretty obscure. It gets the job done, but it's pretty obscure. So with rank, let's bring the measure in, product sales rounded rank. I'll remove that one. Let's just wrap our column headers. Cool, so sales amount rounded with RANKX and rounded with rank, we can see they're basically giving us the same results. So all is well and good. And yeah, I've instructed the measure not to evaluate unless item is in scope, which it's doing as expected. So yeah, that's kind of a crash course in rank and why. So one thing and another thing to remember about rank, or another nice thing about rank, is basically you're always ranking the current context versus this relation table. Whereas in RANKX, there was this confusing thing with you have a third argument, an optional third argument, and that an expression you want to evaluate, which I didn't put in my original measure, but you can have a rank against sales and if you want to have a different expression that you're ranking. It's confusing even trying to explain it, but yeah, you have the option of ranking measure A against measure B evaluated for all products, for example. it's a kind of confusing feature, and rank is much more intuitive. So yeah, in the interest of time, I'll leave that example there. And we're going to jump into visual calculations now. So just check. Maybe I'll just pause if there were any questions on any of the window function examples, or any comments, questions.
Can't see any questions yet. So yeah, all good. Please feel free to proceed.
All good. Yep. Cool. So visual calculations, right? Slightly different topic and quite an interesting one. So what is the point of visual calculations? If you've played with them, I'm sure you've discovered some interesting things you can do. But let me go back. What is the point of visual calculations? Well, visual calculations, as you might expect from the name, are calculations that take place within a visual. They're confined to a visual. They don't look at the wider model. They can't evaluate, they can't really access the model per se, but they can access any values that exist in a particular visual. If you've worked with some other BI tools have similar concepts. If you've worked with Tableau, you will have seen table calculations, which are essentially the same idea, that you're calculating something within the scope of a visual. Why is this a good thing? A big one is, well, two things really. One is performance. So if you can, because every time a visual is rendered by Power BI, it sends a query back to the semantic model. However, with visual calculations, we can perform calculations on the results of that query rather than having to generate multiple queries to do things like cumulative sums, maximum values by category, and those sorts of things. So there's a performance benefit. And also, visual calculations are potentially more intuitive to write for someone maybe less familiar with DAX, or someone that might build reports that doesn't deal with semantic models so much. They can write visual calculations in the report without really worrying about the inner workings of the model. As I'm sure you, for those of you that write measures and create semantic models, you kind of need to know about all the relationships and other properties of the model when you're writing measures, and sometimes things can get complicated. But for a report builder, they just care about what's in the visual and they want to manipulate it. A visual calculation is kind of a more accessible tool for them. Of course, they can write measures, report level measures, but visual calcs have the simplicity of not relying on the model itself per se, just what's in the visual. So let me give you some examples. So what I've got here is an example. So with a field parameter to select, we can choose. So I've created this field parameter. It's just a basic field parameter created through the interface here. And it's got year, month, and date. So it allows us to select what's going to be displayed on the axis, sales by month. And what you'll notice here is so as you change the selection, the axis field changes. Date is a little hard to digest, so I'll leave it on month. And two visual calculations that I've already created are this max sales line and this min sales line. So what those are, basically they're constant or reference lines equal to the either max or the min value encountered within the visual. So without visual calculations, it's pretty messy to create a measure to do this, because if your axis, you don't know in advance, well, I have year, month, or date on my axis, you'll notice that the line has to adapt based on, because year has a higher maximum than month, which has a higher maximum than date. So those maximum min have to adjust based on whatever happens to be on my axis. And a key feature of visual calculations is that you can refer to your axes generically. So let me jump into one of these calculations. So to create a visual calculation, if you haven't done that before, you select the new visual calculation here, or you click add data and click this visual calculation button here. So I've already added 2 visual calculations already, so I can go in and edit these, just clicking this icon. So let's have a look at max sales, what that's doing. So if you haven't worked with visual calculations before, this is the interface. Basically, when you edit a visual calculation, you get a formula bar here, and you get a kind of a preview of the visual, and you get a table view of what's being computed by the existing measures and the visual calculation. So what you can see here is this is a pretty concise piece of code. So it's DAX, but specialized for visual calculations. So we have the key feature to note here is I can reference rows as a generic, think of it as a generic reference to whatever is on the rows of my visual. Rows is, for most visuals, is the default axis. So for this column chart, rows corresponds to this axis, and basically they appear as row headers in this table view down here. So what this is doing is saying, give me the maximum value across my rows of sales amount, where sales amount is not actually not referencing the measure in the semantic model, it's referencing the value displayed in the visual. So kind of means the same. You might think, yeah, they're kind of the same thing, but yeah, in this case, sales amount is a value that's already been retrieved through a DAX query. It's been brought back to the visual, and we're now saying within the visual, give me the maximum value of sales amount by row. So that's kind of a key feature of visual calculations, is you have access to generic row and columns is another one, depend if you have 2 axes on your visual. You have access to those generic axes, and you can iterate over them as though they were a table. And in this case, we're retrieving the maximum sales amount. So 4113, it's a bit hard to see because we're on days. Let's go to years, where it'll be a bit more obvious. So we can see that max sales repeated on every row is retrieved the 2022 value in this case. And similarly, we can use min-x over rows, and I've retrieved the minimum value, which happens to be 2024. So the really nice thing about this is that we don't have to know in advance what's going to be on the axis. Excuse me. And when we're using field parameters, that's a great example of a case where we're allowing the user to change what's on the axis. So, but we can keep the same visual calculation code to, we don't have to write a measure that says if it's month, do this, if it's year, do this, if it's day, do this. It operates on whatever happens to be on the axis. So yeah, that in itself is, in my opinion, saves a lot of time, simplifies code in a lot of scenarios where you would have had to write conditional logic in the past. And it gets pretty messy and you don't always know in advance what fields will be on the axis. In this case, you could put customer on the axis and it would still work. So that's example number 1. I'll keep forging ahead because realize the time. So that's example number 1, generic axis independent visual calculations. Second example, this is one that kind of comes up a lot. So sometimes you want to fill in the blanks, so to speak. So you might have had a requirement, or you might have had your users or report consumers wanting to you get a matrix like this, has a lot of empty space, and then, can we put zeros? They request, can we put zeros into the blanks? And in a matrix kind of visual, that's actually kind of a tricky thing to do nicely. So the problem here is if we try to, I've written a measure here which says coalesce our sales amount with 0. You could also add 0, but coalesce is kind of a nicer way of describing it, I think. So if we use that measure, sales blank to 0 wrong. Where are we? Yeah. What you'll notice happens is you end up with certain rows where everything's 0. It's because we've introduced values where we had blanks in the past that were automatically hidden, and we've now introduced zeros. So we like these zeros where there is a non-blank value on the row, but we don't like these zeros. So we want those ones, but not these ones. So a solution to that is, let's say we try to do it with a measure. I'll show you an example of how you can do it with a measure. And you can look at this, in the PBIX afterwards. But basically, it's not ideal. But what you can do is, if you know what's going to be on the rows and columns, you can say, give me the total by country, give me the total by store, using all selected in both cases. Then if they're both non-blank, that means we want to coalesce our sales with 0, only if those are both non-blank. In other words, that means if we've got a row total, if we've got a column total, yes, we will put a value in the cell, but otherwise don't. So that works. As you can see, I've just brought that measure in. That works, but as soon as I change what's on the rows and columns, it's going to fail because it's tied to those specific fields. So what's the visual calculation solution? The visual calculation solution is quite elegant, I think. We go back to displaying our regular measure, but we create a visual calculation. I'll go add data, visual calculation. I'll call it sales amount blank to 0 equals coalesce sales amount 0. So what that's going to do is, if we go back to the report and I take out, actually what we want to do is hide sales amount. So yeah, another nice feature of visual calcs, you can hide unwanted measures that are used in the calculation. So now what we have, if I just go back to the report view, we now have a much nicer view of things, almost. I'll just fix the formatting. So visual calculations, the formatting's a bit fiddly. You have to come into the format properties. I'll change the format to a whole number, 1,000 separator, 0 decimal places. There we go. So now we have every row is only there, or every column is only there if it has some non-zero or non-blank values. So yeah, visual calculations are for a matrix style visual, are quite an elegant solution to the turn blank into 0 problem. And that will adapt regardless of what's on your rows and columns. So that's really handy. Cool. How else can we use visual calculations? Well, we can actually use visual calculations for conditional formatting as well. So I've gone back to our sales by year, month, or date. I'll leave it on month for now. So an interesting thing we can do with visual calculations is we can generate conditional formatting text values. So in this visual, it's actually hidden. So if I go into, see here, it says some fields are hidden, go and open visual calculations editing mode. So I'll just go up here new visual calculation, but I'll just jump over it. This is the one I've already created. It's called column color. So this is actually a combination of a visual calculation and a window function, rank. So what we can do is we can define our column color as essentially a conditional statement. If our descending rank of sales is 1, color it green. Otherwise, if our ascending rank of sales is 1, color it red. Pretty straightforward. So there's really only two possibilities. If we basically, because I haven't specified any further arguments, default, otherwise, sorry, the code's not displaying. You zoom out a bit. So if you don't return any result, it will use the default, which happens to be blue in this case. So this is quite a concise way of saying rank my top item or items, if there's ties, 1, red, green, and sorry, color my bottom item red. And you could adapt this to, you could use a window, you could use a more general, maybe window-based range. You could say rank the top 3 green, the bottom 3 red, for example. Sorry, color the bottom 3 red. So, and again, this will adapt if I completely change the visual. So it's, let's put customer country on the x-axis, take off the date. Does exactly the same thing. I didn't need to worry about what field was going to be on the axis. That's the really nice feature again of using a visual calculation. So yeah, I'll switch that. In fact, I'll leave that on customer country. Yeah. So yeah. Okay, why does the conditional formatting only show when the visual calculation is hidden? Now, I'm not 100% sure if we need to hide it. That's a good question. So I have hidden the color because it's not something. Yeah, that's a good point. I think the issue is, so on a visual, in this case, it's a line and stack column. Even if I turn it into a stack column, kind of a limitation of Power BI visuals. If you have 2 fields on your y-axis, you are not permitted to have conditional formatting by default. So we need to ensure that there's only 1 y-axis field for the conditional formatting to work. So that's kind of a, even though it's a text value, it's Power BI is being fussy and saying, you've got 2 measures, I can't do conditional formatting. So that's why we have to have that hidden. Cool. All right. Okay, so probably the last couple of points, these are just smaller ones, just some other examples of what we can do with visual calc. So let's say that we've got, this is, I think we're looking at sales quantity now. And let me just modify this back to the original state. Okay, yeah, actually. Here we go. Right, let's suppose we've got sales quantity by country for a few countries. I'll just use the line chart to be a bit different. So quantity by month, and now we're saying, maybe I'd like to, can we normalize these numbers so they're all on a similar scale? Now, there are multiple ways to do this. You could, depending how you want to normalize, what calculation you want to perform. Let's suppose that we just want to do a linear interpolation between the bottom value and actually bottom is there and the top value there, say. So this one we'll treat as 1 and this one we'll treat as 0. So we're going to scale everything so it goes from 0 to 1 regardless of which country, so we get a similar range for all countries. So what we can do is, if we jump back into our visual calculation editing. So this one I've created earlier called, let me just zoom in a bit there. Sorry, they don't give you a very good formula bar here. Anyway, So I called it quantity normalized, which I'm just, if the quantity is not blank to begin with, then we compute a min quantity. Again, I'm using min x over rows, so get the minimum value across all rows. Max quantity, maximum value across all rows. Then I do basically a linear interpolation, kind of normalized calc. So I do the quantity minus the min divided by the max minus the min. So it's basically converting it to a number in a 0 to 1 range. So if I then switch off quantity and switch on quantity normalized, we now see, it's a bit of an ugly chart. Let's just do 2 countries. So we can see how each country varies over its own normalized range. So we have a minimum of, should be able to find a 0 and a 1 for each country. Yeah, there's Canada, there's US, yeah. Bit of a contrived example. You might do some different sort of normalization. This is just sort of an example to show the functionality, but you could do any sort of calculation over the values across the range of the visual like that. And there's an example in here of doing the same thing, but on a cumulative basis. Again, you could do this with measures, basically a cumulative percentage, but you can do it quite nicely with visual calcs, and it doesn't matter what you put on your axis. You need to be careful about ordering things. I haven't gone into great detail on that, but generally speaking, you can do a cumulative percentage that will work for any field on the axis. So have a look in the PBIX to see how this one's set up. Lastly, I'll just mention, we won't go into detail because I realize we're on time, but navigating the hierarchy of a visual, that's another key visual calculation feature. So just to give you a flavor of what you can do, you can navigate between lower levels and higher levels using the collapse and expand functions. So here's an example using collapse, where I've said, take my sales amount, say 250,000, divide that by the collapsed sales amount, which is basically the parent. So the 3.8 million, and that's, return that as a percentage, 7%. So collapse and expand, really, and there's variations, collapse all, expand all. You can specify a number of levels. So you can do all sorts of hierarchy navigation with those functions, those families of functions. And another little example I sort of came up with was, if you want to count, okay, how many items are under computers? Computers has 6 children. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Cell phones has 2 children, 1, 2. The way that works is using the expand function, so the opposite of collapse. So we expand one level, then we count rows. It's a bit of a cryptic syntax. We have to count rows of values rows. Bit of a weird one, but that's how it works. And we're expanding rows when we do that. So we expand rows, and then we compute the number of rows that exist when we expand. So basically, if I go to the very top level, you'll see at the total level, the number of children is 8, because we have 8 categories. Computers, go back to the visual report view. We have 8 categories, so total level is 8. And with any category, we have a certain number of brands within that category, in this case 3. When you get to the bottom level, it kind of just says 1. We'd probably handle that better. In reality, we might blank that out. But yeah, just to illustrate the ability to navigate the hierarchy with expand and collapse, that's yeah, definitely a good one to go away and play with and see what interesting calculations you can perform, because historically you needed to specify, oh, I want to get a total by category or a total by brand, but now you can just say go up 1 level, go down 1 level, go to the top level, go to the bottom level, that kind of thing. So a lot more flexible. So I will finish there, as I realize I'm a few minutes over time. I've got some references, some articles SQL BI, as usual, is a great resource. But you can go through the Microsoft documentation as well. But SQL BI put together some great papers on both of these features. I think the Visual Calc paper is under their SQL BI Plus subscription, but the window function one is free, I believe. Yeah, so that is pretty much the content I wanted to cover. I will pause for a swig of coffee, and yeah, did anyone want to jump in with any questions or comments on anything we talked about, really?
Awesome presentation. Thank you, Owen. We have about like 30 people live broadcast watching as well, and they all liked it as it looks like it. Any questions? Anyone, please feel free to put it down here. And I will also share the Power BI file link that you have sent here under this as a comment.
Yes.
Under this. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, perfect. Thanks, Teresa. Yeah, it's it's in there. Yes, that'd be great if you can share that. Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks for the
Looks
kind words. So I can see
like
a few comments. Thank you.
No questions. Everyone liked it. That's perfect. Awesome presentation. Great work. Always liked the way that these window functions works as well. Just one question on your side. How much you use visual calculation yourself these days?
Well, for me, I think I've used them. I'll admit, not a lot, but yeah, a couple of projects where I've used them. One was where we had to do a Pareto style chart. So that's essentially where typically you have, for example, here we have bars going from largest to smallest, and then you have like a cumulative curve. This is kind of rotated, but so Pareto style calculations, basically a cumulative sum displayed alongside the underlying values. I've used that on one project recently, and another was basically in a matrix. We wanted to show how many rows are in this matrix. So that's where a visual calculation, you can do it with measures, but it's kind of nicer with a visual calc. Like, similar to that last example, how many rows exist within this group. You can do it similar to what we've got here. So the client wanted to easily see what's the row count of the matrix without having to just have a separate card or separate visual. So yeah, but I sort of don't use them too much just because they're in preview. I'm sort of being cautious, but I've used another example, generating waterfall charts without using it, which didn't quite fit with the built-in waterfall visual. I think Reed Havens it was inspired by Reed Havens Consulting video. If you look that one up, waterfall charts with visual calculations, that's another scenario where I've used those. Yeah, so
awesome.
Every so often, yes, I can see some examples in the comments. Row number function, yeah, we didn't touch on that, but that's another good one.
Awesome, cool, thank you.
Cool.
One thing for everyone before leaving is that we have upcoming Power BI and Fabric Summit that is going to be in February, last week of February. It is a fully online event. We have like 150 sessions from 160 speakers. Any topic in Power BI and Microsoft Fabric, you'll find a session there, which is amazing. So I highly recommend you to go and watch it. We'll put the link to that down in the description below. We also have the Definity conference coming up if you are based in Auckland, Melbourne, or Sydney, and we look forward to seeing you over there. Again, thanks everyone for watching us. Special thanks to Owen for the presentation. Anything else you would like to mention, Owen?
No, thanks for attending, everyone. And sorry, I'm doing this presentation because I won't be able to make Definity this year. So I wish everyone all the best for for Definity. Yeah, Reza and everyone else, enjoy it if you're going.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was an amazing presentation. And from me, David, Indra, thank you again all joining us here. David, Indra, anything to say? Last words?
Awesome presentation as usual.
Great.
Thanks a lot.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Hello.